Hi submarine friends. Today I'm going to make a video talking about air compensation versus oil compensation in my thruster motors and electric arm. I've always been a huge fan of oil compensating, but I've discovered that oil compensating does not work well in larger motors, the 100-pound thrust for instance. I've always used 30 and 50-pound thrust motors. I've always had plenty of power and been happy with them, but for the guys that use the larger motors, it's not working out. The brushes are deteriorating too quickly, and I think it's even causing damage to the armatures. I'm not sure. But anyways, I needed to figure out air compensation because air compensation works best for the electric arm because there's passageways that I've had to drill in the linear actuators, and I know that the air will travel back and forth through those passageways better than oil will. So I was forced into it. So I've cracked the code on how it works. So what I do is I take my scuba tank in the back of the sub. It has a first stage regulator on it, 3000 psi regulator, drops the pressure to 150. That air pressure travels down the hose to this valve. That's irrelevant for other submarines. I'm just saying that that's how it works here. From here, it goes to another first stage regulator. But that first stage regulator is modified. So what I do is I take the regulator, I take it apart, and I remove the spring. There's one large spring inside here. This is a piston type regulator. Cheapest could be on Amazon. With that spring removed, and with 150 pounds or whatever it is coming into the regulator, spring removed, it only lets out 2 psi, maybe 3 psi. Honestly, I haven't measured it. Whatever the pressure is, it's perfect. So now, all I do is I remove the low pressure plugs. I screw in the hose as if it's your regulator that you breathe through. So the regulator hose, I simply cut it off. I cut the end off, and I have a barbed fitting in the thruster motor. I just push the hose on, put a clamp on it, done. Now, that puts the pressure into the motor. Now, when I'm surfacing, the pressure has to be released. This regulator doesn't do that. That's where the second stage regulator does the job when you're scuba diving. So what I've done is in one of the lines that goes to one of the motors, I put a pressure relief valve, and I'm telling you, it's like a $12 adjustable relief valve. So I just set that thing on 3 psi or so. So as the submarine is surfacing, the air inside the motors is expanding, and it just goes out that valve. Now there's only one valve for all the motors and the arm, and that valve seems to keep up just fine. This has been 400 feet with this system, and the motors come up bone dry. So I could not be happier. The old way of doing it with the second stage regulator, I find that very hit and miss. I'm sure some people have made it work, but this to me is absolutely bulletproof, and it's dirt cheap, and it's easy to hook up. So the only tricky part was I had to do a little work to modify the second stage regulator here to accept a number 4 JIC fitting. But that wasn't the end of the world. You can probably just buy that fitting, but I made it up. I have all the stuff to do that. So that's the way to go in my opinion.